Now, as I've mentioned before, and many other people have mentioned before, this 2017 NFL draft features a very, very strong running back class. Lots of guys throughout the entirety of the draft that could really contribute and make a difference for NFL teams. Several guys that look like they have potential star power. They have potential real, true impact player ability. And even with that being said, I think there are two guys that really are just a little bit above the rest, and that is Leonard Fournette and Dalvin Cook. Now, I've already given my scouting report of Leonard Fournette and given you my comparison to who I think he could be like at the NFL level, how I've graded him. I think he's a first round talent. Now, I'm going to talk about Dalvin Cook, who I grade just a little bit higher. Now, granted, the difference is not much, but there is a small difference to me. And some of this, again, comes down to personal preference. I cannot lie. And a lot of it comes down ultimately once you get to the NFL level, what type of situation these backs end up in, what type of system they end up in, how they end up being utilized, how they end up being featured. So, long term, it'll only be proven out who's right and who's not, or if it really even made much of a difference. I think back to the 2007 draft as a bit of a relevant example here in terms of the running back position. You had Adrian Peterson and Marshawn Lynch. Now, coming out of college, because of fewer durability concerns, I actually was higher on Marshawn Lynch than Adrian Peterson. Now, a lot of people in theory will just flat out take Adrian Peterson and that is it. But there's probably an undercurrent of people, a much more sizable portion that would be given credit for it, that would actually have a preference for Marshawn Lynch. Much less propensity to put the ball on the ground, fewer overall durability concerns, while Adrian Peterson had a longer track record of excellence. When Marshawn Lynch was excellent, he was really excellent, and he played big in some big time games and ultimately led the Seahawks to two Super Bowl trips and won a Super Bowl, something Adrian Peterson has never been able to do. Those two backs, I think, in a lot of ways, even if we don't talk about it now, a decade later, in my mind at least, they're always kind of measured against each other. And I think that's what's going to happen with Leonard Fournette and Dalvin Cook throughout their careers. Just like you see sometimes with quarterbacks when they're taking 1-2, or you see the class of 2004, you got Eli and Phillip Rivers and Big Ben, all three of them taken with the first 11 picks. Their careers ultimately parallel each other, and they're ultimately measured against each other. I think the same thing's going to happen with Fournette and Cook in this draft. The Fournette's a special talent. And I think Dalvin Cook is a special talent as well, too. When you look at his resume, his 3 years at Florida State, over 5,200 career total yards between rushing and receiving, 48 total touchdowns. He averaged 6.5 yards per rushing attempt, almost 12 yards per reception. I mean, this guy's a big play threat. He's a true home run threat every single time he touches the ball. And similar to Leonard Fournette, when you pop in the film for him, you watch it and you see if this guy is healthy, this guy is right. This guy is special. I get that same type of feeling as well, not just with Fournette, but also with Dalvin Cook. So let me talk a little bit about Dalvin Cook as a prospect and why I view him like I do and why I have him graded as my number one running back in the 2017 NFL Draft. Let's take a look at his strengths because he's got a lot of them. First of all, you got to go with quickness and speed. Now, I think he's more explosive than Leonard Fournette. I do want to say, though, I want to point out that when it comes to actual 40 speed and actual playing speed, and once they get to top speed, I don't think there's much of a difference between Cook and Fournette. And a perfect example of this would be, to me, if you were running a 4x1 and you had both guys run on the backstretch, the second leg. Once they got the baton, they've already had a chance to get up to their top speed by the time they got the baton. I think Fournette and Dalvin Cook go nose to nose. I really do. But Dalvin Cook has that special explosiveness, that quick initial burst that makes him a nightmare in the open field. On top of that, shows a tremendous ability to both break and avoid tackles. When you look at Dalvin Cook and you look at his skill set, you look at his size, you assume this is a guy that dances a lot and he has to make people miss with explosiveness, quickness, speed, change of pace and direction. And he does all of that. But this is a guy that runs with a nasty streak. This is a guy that can be really hard to tackle with arm tackles, even at 5'11.5" or so, 205 pounds. This is a guy that runs with force, runs with a purpose, and you saw it a lot. He was a willing runner between the tackles, and he could be really tough to bring down between the tackles at a surprising level for a guy of his size. And with his skill set, you would assume the kind of dancing athletic dude, and he is much more than that. He's just really tough to tackle, regardless of where he is, whether he's running between the tackles or he's in the open field. And I thought that was really impressive to me. And, at first when I was going to restudy him, I thought it was going to really stand out that he was going to get a 10 in the category of break and avoid tackle, mostly just because he made people miss and got people off balance. But when I watched him more and more, I said, oh my God, this guy runs physically. He runs with the purpose between the tackles. And that's another way that he makes defenders miss. It's just incredible. His vision and patience are great, because sometimes you get those running backs that are really explosive and fast, and you have concerns that they might get impatient. They might try to rely too much on their quickness and their speed. And I look at Ezekiel Elliott as he transitioned to the NFL. His first game in the NFL in the regular season was against the New York Giants, and you could see that first game, he didn't trust his offensive line yet. He was too eager to get the ball and go because he was too hungry to try and prove himself. He was trying to establish himself, and his performance kind of lagged behind. I think he had like 21 carries for 51 yards and a touchdown. It wasn't a great performance. It was easily the worst performance Ezekiel Elliott had throughout 2016. Once he figured out that I've got the best offensive line in football, I could slow down, wait for the holes to open, see the holes, attack the holes with my elite quickness and home run speed, and I can end up playing even faster. And that's exactly what he did. So as the year went along, you could really see that progression. But Dalvin Cook, I look at him, I see a guy that stays within himself, stays patient, and then has the ability to see the hole, has the ability to recognize sometimes where the hole isn't yet, but it's going to be. Incredible. As well as his cutting ability. This is a guy that can stop and start with the best of them. This is a guy that can cut left sharply, can cut right sharply. He can do double moves, spin moves. He can do anything in the open field. And then on top of that, when you take all of these things, the explosiveness, the quickness, the speed, the cutting ability, you look at his receiving skills. I mean, this is a guy as a running back with a really, really advanced route tree. Probably the best pure wide receiver type at the running back position in 2017's draft is going to be Christian McCaffrey. He has the most refined route tree. But Dalvin Cook is not far behind, and Dalvin Cook is a little bit of a better overall athlete than Christian McCaffrey. His receiving skills, though, great hands, a very expansive route tree, almost a wide receiver level of route tree. And then again, once you get him into the open field, run after the catch is going to be a big deal for him. Just so many things to like about Dalvin Cook's game. Now, of course, again, just like with any other prospect, there are those concern areas that could potentially hold him back from reaching his full potential. One concern is pass protection, and I talk about this with the running backs in general. I said the same thing with Leonard Fournette, and I'll say it about some of the other top names as well, is that if you're drafting these running backs and you're concerned about their pass protecting skills, and that's like a primary concern, or that's a primary reason you don't draft them, you're not doing the NFL draft right. Dalvin Cook shows some willingness, but again, at his size, he's never going to be one that's going to be able to sit there and stonewall somebody. He's best utilized as somebody going low, somebody that can help out on a double team, somebody that can chip block. But is that really even then the best utilization of Dalvin Cook and his skill set? The answer is absolutely not. You don't want to utilize him as a pass protector, but he is going to have to get a little better at it at the NFL level. The two areas of concern that are real major concerns to me for Dalvin Cook are durability and ball security. Now, first I'll get to durability. This is a guy that's had some shoulder problems in the past. He's had to have shoulder surgery before, and that's something that's going to have to get evaluated at the combine by team doctors and be given the green light. It could be a potential red flag. Is he going to have chronic shoulder issues? Especially for a guy like him that runs as physically as he does, could he run the risk of being a guy that perpetually has a problem with the shoulder? It's a fair question. And a guy with that type of running style, and the way he runs hard, but also some of the moves he makes, is he going to be more prone to getting lower body injuries? Could he be prone to tearing up knee ligaments or tearing up his ankle or doing something like that? Those are valid questions. And also with that said, there's a lot of talk about Leonard Fournette and the workload that he had while he was at LSU. But honestly, and this is sometimes where you have to look at the numbers and look beyond the narratives that are put out there, Dalvin Cook in 3 years at Florida State actually handled the ball more than Leonard Fournette. Leonard Fournette had more of a workhorse type of year in 2015, but overall, because of the games that Fournette missed in 2016, over the course of 3 years between as a rusher and as a receiver, it was Dalvin Cook who touched the ball more. So he's got quite a bit of workload on his body for his 3 years at Florida State. So is that going to potentially catch up to him? I don't know that it will. I'm just saying it could. But we could say that with any player, durability could technically always be a concern, even if they've never been injured before, because shit can happen. The number one primary concern I have for Dalvin Cook, though, and this is an area he has to get better on, because if he doesn't, he's going to have trouble, and that's ball security. With a guy like him, sometimes I think every once in a while you have to learn with he might turn the ball over. But he can't have some of the ugly, just kind of what the fuck turnovers and fumbles that he had like he did at Florida State. I mean, he had some really screwy, awkward ones. Got ones where the ball is literally handed off to him and he just drops it. He's running and then the ball drops. It's just some really flukish, weird, fucked up type of fumbles, and he's got to get better at that. Because there's no quicker way as a young running back to land in the coach's doghouse than to put the ball on the ground. Because for a guy like Dalvin Cook, teams looking at potentially spending a top 15 pick on him or a top 20 at very worst pick on him, they need an impact player that they can rely upon, that they can trust, especially in late game situations, potentially in the red zone, trying to milk the clock with 4 minutes to go. You can't run the risk of this guy putting the ball on the ground and giving the opposing team real momentum and giving them a chance to win when they shouldn't have had the chance to win. Dalvin Cook is going to have to learn how to protect the ball better. And some of that is just paying attention. Some of that is technique. Some of that is any number of things, maybe getting a little stronger. But he's got to get better at it. If he gets better at ball security, watch out NFL, because Dalvin Cook is special. Now, when I was thinking in terms of NFL comparisons, I hear a lot of comparisons to a Jamal Charles. And I see those comparisons, and I will not disagree with those comparisons. I found another player in this class at the running back position that I'm more closely associated with Jamal Charles. Dalvin Cook, when I watch the film, who does he remind me of? He reminds me a lot of Marshall Faulk. Now, I know that might be crazy sitting there and comparing Dalvin Cook to one of the truly great all-purpose running backs in NFL history, Super Bowl champion, league MVP, Hall of Famer. And I'm not saying Dalvin Cook is going to do all of that, but I'm saying when I saw Marshall Faulk at San Diego State in the early 90s and I see Dalvin Cook right now, I see an awful lot of similarities. They both leap out to me about the same. And I see Dalvin Cook's explosiveness, his quickness, his speed, his ability to make defenders miss, his vision, his patience, his ability to cut, his superior receiving skills. Doesn't that sound like a Marshall Faulk scouting report? And again, when you watch him, some of the moves he makes, they remind me of Marshall Faulk. And looking at that, I think that part is what tied into me grading Dalvin Cook as my number one running back in the 2017 NFL Draft. Now, granted, for some teams, Leonard Fournette might be number one on the board, or maybe somebody else, and I get that. It's understandable. And in this draft class, I can understand, because even with Cook and Fournette, like I talked about, there's not much of a gap between them. Even the next couple of guys on the list, like Kamara and McCaffrey, there's not much of a difference there either. And this is a really talented running back class. So I understand that Dalvin Cook is not the first running back taken, but if he's not taken in the first 20 picks, minus some big serious red flag coming up because of his shoulder injury or some 11th hour off the field crap that I can't really project, he needs to be a top 20 pick. Now, I know there are some concerns about the crew that he hangs out with, and that is something that will have to be monitored and examined at the NFL level, and Dalvin Cook's going to have to understand the importance of surrounding yourself with the right type of people. But, frankly, sometimes I saw one assessment was talking about how he hangs around some real thuggish type of dudes, and I'm like, oh, here we go with that shit. Frankly, if we want to talk about players in professional sports, white, black, and otherwise, some of the biggest thugs in their lives are the friends and family members that leech onto these young men, that take advantage of these young men. Those are the ones you have to worry about the most negative influences. The homeboys or the good buddies that you hang out with, sometimes they can be bad influences, but sometimes, frankly, the worst influences can be family, and they can be the biggest problem. So I'm just saying, Dalvin Cook did have the one off the field incident. That is going to be something that's going to have to be investigated a little bit. Now, ultimately, he was acquitted of it. Conflicting stories, this and that. And, maybe that can speak to judgment. So I'm not saying he's a perfect prospect. And his grading overall is a 92, so you can see that I'm not anointing him a perfect prospect. And nor is he the #1 prospect on my board in the 2017 NFL draft because of things such as durability and ball security and potentially some concerns about judgment and the people that he hangs around with. But I still think he's a special talent. I still think he's somebody that has to be taken in the top half of the 2017 NFL draft. And if teams don't, then teams, again, aren't doing the NFL draft right. When I look at his best fits, Jacksonville could be a fit if they want to, play him in a way that utilizes all of his 3-down abilities. New York with the Jets is definitely a fit, I think. Somebody that could step in and take over for Forte. Carolina, I know, is not perceived as a tremendous fit. Everybody just automatically assumes Leonard Fournette, but I think Dalvin Cook is a better fit there than people want to give credit for. I think New Orleans would be a splendid fit. Now, I know Saints fans would probably freak out if they took Dalvin Cook #11, and I understand there are bigger needs, but if at that point in time Dalvin Cook was your #1 player on the board, I think you'd do much worse if you're the Saints than by taking Dalvin Cook. I don't care if you have Mark Ingram and everything else. Dalvin Cook is special. The Cleveland Browns at 12, if Cook is there, I think they'd be ridiculous not to explore taking him. Same thing with the Colts and the Eagles, whichever team ends up with the 14th pick. That to me should be the basement, the absolute floor of where Dalvin Cook goes in this draft. Like I said, unless something unforeseen happens, unless something significant medically happens, and even if that does, I don't know if that should be enough to drop him any further than that. If Dalvin Cook is not one of the first 15 picks in the 2017 NFL draft, and if Leonard Fournette is not one of the top 20 picks in the 2017 NFL draft, then I don't know what to tell you. You can talk about the devaluing of the position all you want, but these guys are elite talents. They're studs. And they should be drafted in a place that is commensurate with their stud factor because they've both got it. I just think at the end of the day, Dalvin Cook might have a little more stud factor than Leonard Fournette.